She learned three things in one night: how to run in heels on wet cobblestone, how to hold her breath past the point of pain, and how a man everyone called a monster could look at her like she was the only fragile thing left in a city built entirely out of knives. If you believe loyalty should mean something, that no empire built on betrayal deserves to stand, hit like and subscribe right now. This story exposes the traitor hiding behind a friendly smile. Only manipulators, snakes, and people who'd sell out their own family stay quiet. Subscribe if you're not one of them. Seoul at midnight didn't sleep so much as it changed clothes. By day, it wore glass towers and polite bows. By night, it slipped into something else entirely. Neon, bleeding down wet streets like spilled candy, karaoke bars exhaling drunken love songs into alleys that smelled of soju and secrets. Somewhere beneath all that shimmer, in windowless rooms and black cars with tinted glass, the real city did its business, and its business was rarely legal. Kang Min-jae owned that city the way a landlord owns a building he's never once had to fix personally because other people did the fixing and the disappearing on his behalf. He didn't need to raise his voice. He barely needed to raise an eyebrow. When Min-jae entered a room, conversations didn't stop. They simply became more careful, the way people get careful around a sleeping dog they already know can bite. He built his empire the way a mason builds a wall, one deliberate brick at a time, mortared with debts, favors, and the occasional inconvenient disappearance. He'd survived 3 assassination attempts, outlived 2 rival bosses who'd made the mistake of underestimating him, and once sat through an entire opera because a foreign investor insisted it was culturally enriching. Min Jae had decided somewhere along the way that fear was simply respect that hadn't been formally introduced yet. So when the message arrived on an ordinary Tuesday, carried by a courier who had no idea what he was holding, which Min Jae privately considered the safest kind of courier, he almost didn't bother reading it twice. 3 words: no name, no signature. She knows everything. Min Jae laughed, a short, dry bark. The laugh of a man who found parking tickets more threatening than anonymous notes. His men did not laugh. Laughing, in this line of work, was a luxury reserved for people who weren't currently trying to figure out which of their trusted associates had a big mouth and an even bigger death wish. "Who is she?" he asked, already bored with the question. The answer took 4 hours, 2 beatings that produced nothing but bruised knuckles, and one extremely nervous hotel manager to finally arrive. And when it did, it made even Min Jae sit up straighter. Not a rival's daughter. Not a prosecutor hungry for a career-making case. A translator. A young black woman named Amara, hired for one single night to smooth conversation between Korean executives and foreign donors at a charity gala thrown, with an irony thick enough to slice and serve with rice, to raise funds for victims of organized crime. Min Jae actually smiled at that. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor darker than his own. Amara hadn't gone looking for trouble. She'd come to Seoul chasing something smaller and infinitely more reasonable. A stable paycheck, a foothold in a career she loved, a life quiet enough to actually build something on. That night, she'd gone looking for nothing more dangerous than a bathroom. She took a wrong turn past a service corridor lined with velvet rope and worse intentions, and stumbled straight into a private room where 2 of Min Jae's most trusted lieutenants were speaking in low-clipped Korean about a betrayal that could tear the entire organization apart from the inside. She understood maybe 60% of the words. She understood 100% of the fear radiating off both men. That was more than enough to know she needed to leave, quietly, immediately, and without ever having existed in that hallway at all. She almost made it. A man near the door caught her reflection in a mirrored panel. One careless, unforgivable second, and just like that, Amara stopped being an unlucky translator and became a problem. Within the hour, her name, her photo, and her hotel room number had traveled through Min Jae's network faster than any donation had ever moved through that gala's collection plate. By the time Min Jae finished his drink, the order had already gone out to find her. He didn't yet know that the woman his men were hunting through Seoul's rain-soaked streets was about to do something no rival, no informant, no bullet had ever managed. She was about to make him hesitate. And in his world, hesitation wasn't weakness. It was the first crack in a wall he'd sworn, for 20 years, could never fall. Amara had exactly 11 minutes of ignorance left when she stepped out of that hotel corridor, smoothed the front of her dress, and told herself the tightness in her chest was nothing more than nerves about her flight home next week. 11 minutes to believe her biggest problem in Seoul was jet lag and a slightly awkward joke about traffic. She spent 9 of those minutes at the open bar, nursing a club soda she didn't really want because she'd learned early in her career that translators who drink on the job don't stay employed for long. She spent the 10th minute laughing politely at a donor's joke that wasn't actually funny. Something about how Seoul traffic moved slower than international bureaucracy, which, fine, was a little funny. She spent the 11th minute noticing that the man in the dark suit by the elevator had been standing in exactly the same spot for far too long. Not drinking, not talking, just watching her the way a hawk watches something it hasn't yet decided is worth the dive. By the time she reached her hotel room, 2 more men were waiting in the hallway who definitely did not work for housekeeping. She didn't scream. Screaming, she'd later realize, was a luxury reserved for people who still believed someone was coming to save them. Instead, her mind did frantic, useless math while her hand fumbled for her phone, gone before her fingers even closed around empty air. A grip like a vice closed over her arm instead, firm but almost courteous, which was somehow worse. "Ms. Amara," the man said, pleasant as a hotel concierge. "Mr. Kang would like a word." "I don't know a Mr. Kang," she said. True, and also the single least useful sentence she'd ever spoken in her life. They didn't hurt her on the ride there. That, she'd learn, was the unsettling part. The careful, professional gentleness of men who'd clearly done this before and understood that bruises complicated things later. She sat in the back of a black car that smelled of leather and old cigarette smoke, flanked by 2 silent men, watching Seoul split into 2 different cities outside the window. First, the glittering half, towers, neon, delivery bikes weaving through traffic like schools of fish. Then, abruptly, the other half. No street signs, no soju ads, just warehouses, shuttered gates, and a silence that felt load-bearing, like it was the only thing holding the buildings up. The room they finally brought her into was too clean to belong to anyone honest. Kang Min-jae sat behind a desk that probably cost more than her yearly salary, flanked by men whose expressions ranged from bored to actively hopeful that she'd give them a reason. "Sit," Min-jae said, not looking up from whatever he was reading. "I'll stand," Amara said. That got his attention. He looked up slowly, the particular slowness of a man whose furniture had just talked back to him. His advisors traded glances that clearly translated to this one has a death wish and remarkably good posture. "You understand," Min-jae said, switching to careful, deliberate English, "that I could have you disappear before your flight ever leaves the ground. No one would ask questions. People vanish in this city more easily than tourists like to believe." "I believe you," Amara said, her voice trembling just slightly, though she refused to look away. "I also believe you already know I didn't come here to steal anything. I came to translate a toast about clean water wells in Cambodia. I got a bathroom wrong. That's the entire crime." One of the advisors snorted, quickly disguising it as a cough when Min-jae's eyes cut in his direction. "She's lying," said the oldest man in the room, broad-shouldered, gray creeping into his temples, the kind of presence that suggested history rather than rank. "Or she's telling the truth, and it doesn't matter either way. She's a liability. Mercy is a disease, Min-jae. You taught me that yourself." Min-jae didn't answer right away. He studied Amara instead. The trembling hand she refused to hide, the chin she refused to lower, a fear that hadn't curdled into begging the way it always did with the men who sat in that chair. He'd watched seasoned enforcers weep and grovel in this exact room. He'd never once respected a single one of them for it. He respected her. That, more than the note, more than the leak, more than the war brewing somewhere just outside his walls, was the thing that actually frightened him. "Leave us," he said quietly. The room cleared slower than he'd have liked, his oldest friend lingering a beat too long in the doorway, his expression unreadable in a way Min-jae, professionally paranoid about everyone, should have caught. He didn't. Not yet. When the door finally clicked shut, it was just the 2 of them. A man who'd built an empire on never hesitating, and a woman who'd just, without meaning to, cracked its first brick. "Talk," Min-jae said. "Tell me exactly what you heard." And Amara, He let her name sit in his mouth like it belonged to someone who mattered. Choose your next words carefully. They may decide whether you live to translate anything ever again. Amara had rehearsed this moment a dozen times in the car, in the elevator, in the 4 seconds before that door clicked shut. She'd planned to sound calm, measured, like a professional giving testimony instead of a woman one wrong sentence away from disappearing. What came out instead was the truth, blunt and unpolished, because apparently that was all her nervous system had left to offer. Two men, she said, older. One had a scar near his left ear, thin, like a knife had missed once. They were talking about a shipment. No, not a shipment, a route. Something about how the route through the harbor kept leaking, and how someone had been feeding information to people who shouldn't have it for over a year. One of them said, she hesitated, the words feeling dangerous even secondhand. He said, the family already knows. They just don't know it's family. Minjae's expression didn't change. That, Amara would learn, was the most alarming thing about him. His face was a locked door, and you never knew which room the silence was coming from. Anything else? He said. Not a question, an instruction. They mentioned a name. I only caught part of it. It sounded like an address, or maybe a nickname. Baekdu. Does that mean anything? For the first time all night, something flickered behind Minjae's eyes. Quick, involuntary, gone before it could be named. Baekdu. A mountain. A myth. And apparently a code name he recognized immediately, judging by the way his jaw tightened like a fist closing around a secret it hadn't been ready to hold. It means, he said slowly, that you understood a great deal more than 60% of that conversation. I told you the truth. You told me a truth that could get us both killed before sunrise, he said, standing for the first time, circling the desk with the unhurried menace of a man who'd never needed to rush toward danger. Danger generally had the good sense to come to him. Do you understand what you overheard, Mizumura? You didn't stumble onto a smuggling route. You stumbled onto proof that someone inside my own organization, someone I have trusted for years, has been selling me out. I didn't ask to understand any of it, she said, and something in her voice cracked slightly. Not from weakness, but from the exhausting effort of holding herself together for the better part of an hour. I translate toasts about clean water and orphanage funding. I have never once in my entire life wanted to know anything about code names or harbor routes or family secrets. I want my passport back. I want to go home. You can't go home because you won't let me. Because, Minjae said, and for the first time his voice lost its careful edge, the men who spotted you already know your face, your hotel, and thanks to my own network's efficiency, probably your shoe size by now. If I let you walk out of this building, you will not make it to the airport. You will not make it to the lobby. This isn't a threat. It's an inventory of facts. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Amara had ever heard. She sank finally into the chair she'd refused 20 minutes earlier, not from surrender, but because her legs had quietly voted without consulting the rest of her. Minjae watched her do it, and something about the gesture, the small collapse of a woman who'd spent the entire conversation refusing to collapse, rearranged something behind his ribs that he didn't have a name for and didn't particularly want one. His oldest friend chose that exact moment to knock, then enter without waiting for permission, a privilege earned over 20 years of loyalty, or what had, until recently, looked exactly like loyalty. The safe house on Yoido is ready, he said, gaze flicking to Amara with the polite disinterest of a man discussing furniture. We move her there before dawn, quietly. We move her there, Minjae repeated. Not a question, but not quite agreement either. Unless you've decided to keep her as a house guest, his friend said, the joke landing somewhere between humor and warning. The others are already asking why she's still breathing, Minjae. I bought you an hour, maybe two. Minjae looked at Amara, at the mascara starting to blur beneath her eyes, at the hands still trembling slightly in her lap, at the woman who had somehow, in under an hour, become the single most complicated variable his empire had faced in a decade. 2 hours, he said. Get the car ready. His friend nodded once and left, the door easing shut behind him with a softness that felt almost apologetic. Neither of them could have known, not yet, that the safe in safe house was about to become the emptiest word in the entire Korean language, or that the man who just walked out to arrange their protection already knew better than anyone, exactly how unsafe it would be. The building on Uedo looked, from the outside, like every other tired concrete apartment block in Seoul, the kind with a laundromat on the ground floor and a convenience store that never quite closed. That was the point. Min-jae's organization didn't hide its money in mansions. It hid it in mediocrity, tucked behind beige curtains and buzzing fluorescent hallway lights that flickered just enough to look neglected rather than watched. Amara sat on a couch that smelled faintly of instant noodles and old cigarette smoke, wrapped in a jacket someone had thrown over her shoulders without asking, and tried very hard not to think about the fact that she was now, officially, a fugitive hiding with the very organization that had, 3 hours earlier, been debating whether to kill her. "You should sleep," Min-jae said. He stood by the window, not looking through it directly. She'd noticed he never stood directly in front of glass, always angled, always calculating a line of sight she couldn't see. "We leave again before sunrise." "I don't think my body's aware that's an option right now." He almost smiled. Almost. It was, she was beginning to suspect, the closest thing his face did to genuine amusement. A flicker, quickly filed away before it could be mistaken for softness. "You handled my advisors well," he said. "Most people beg." You argued. Would begging have worked? "No," he admitted. "But it's what they expect." "You didn't give them what they expected." "Men like that don't know what to do with a variable they can't predict." "Is that what I am to you? A variable?" He considered the question longer than she expected. "You were," he said finally. "I'm less certain now." Before she could decide whether that was a compliment or a threat, with this man, the line seemed to exist purely for sport. The first gunshot tore through the hallway door. Everything after that happened in the specific, disjointed way trauma always does. Too fast to process, too slow to escape. Min-jae was moving before the second shot landed, hauling her off the couch by the arm with a grip that would leave a bruise she wouldn't notice until the next morning. "Down," he barked, and she went down. Glass raining from the window as bullets chewed through the beige curtains that had, until 90 seconds ago, seemed like the most boring fabric in Seoul. "These aren't rivals," Min-jae said, low and clipped, dragging her toward the kitchen as return fire erupted from his men in the hallway. "Rivals don't know this address. Nobody knows this address." "Somebody clearly does." He didn't answer, because the answer was worse than anything he wanted to say out loud. Someone inside his own circle. Someone with access to safe house locations that were supposed to exist in exactly 3 minds had just handed their location to men currently trying to redecorate the apartment with gunfire. The stairwell was chaos, smoke, the acrid smell of gunpowder mixing absurdly with the greasy leftover scent of someone's abandoned instant noodles. Bodies falling in ways that Amara would spend months trying not to remember in detail. Min-jae shoved her behind him at one point, took a graze along his shoulder that he didn't so much as flinch at, and returned fire with a calm precision that reminded her, horribly, that whatever else he had done this before, many times. "There," he said, pointing to a service door half hidden behind an overflowing recycling bin. "Laundry chute. Move." "You're joking." I have never once joked about a laundry chute in my life. It was, without question, the least dignified escape Amara had ever imagined for herself. Sliding down a metal chute reeking of fabric softener, landing in an overflowing bin of hotel linens, 2 floors below with Min-jae crashing down half a second after her, his tailored jacket now streaked with grime that no dry cleaner in Seoul would ever fully forgive. For one absurd, breathless moment, surrounded by stolen sheets and the distant echo of gunfire above them, they just looked at each other. "Beneath your dignity?" Amara managed, half laughing, half sobbing, adrenaline making a mess of both. "Deeply," Min-jae said, extracting a pillowcase from his collar with as much composure as a man could summon while smelling faintly of lavender detergent. "Dignity's a poor investment," she said, "when people are shooting at you. And there, filthy, bleeding slightly, 12 floors below the ruins of a safe house that clearly hadn't been safe at all." King Min-jae laughed. A real one. The first, Amara suspected, in longer than he'd admit. It didn't last. Somewhere above them, boots hit the stairwell, fast and searching. "Move," he said again, all humor gone, hauling her up by the arm. "We're not out yet. We're barely started." The abandoned subway line beneath Uedo had been sealed for a decade, ever since a construction scandal buried 3 contractors' careers along with the funding. Officially, it didn't exist. Unofficially, it was exactly the kind of nowhere a man like Min Jae kept memorized for nights, exactly like this one. They dropped through a maintenance grate 2 blocks from the ruined safe house. Min Jae going first, catching Amara when her heel, still, impossibly, on her foot after everything, skidded on the rusted ladder rung. The tunnel swallowed them in a darkness so complete it felt less like an absence of light and more like a presence of its own, thick and mineral, tasting of rust and standing water. "Talk to me," Amara said, mostly to keep her own voice from shaking apart entirely. "Who attacks a safe house that only 3 people know about?" "Someone who was one of the 3, Minjae said. His flashlight, small, military-grade, the kind of object that suggested he kept several on his person at all times, cut a narrow path ahead of them. "Which means the leak isn't outside my organization, it's inside my family." "Family? Or family?" "Both," he said, and something in his tone made it clear the distinction mattered less than it should have. "In my world, they're rarely different things." They walked for what felt like an hour, though Amara's sense of time had abandoned her somewhere around the laundry chute. Somewhere in that stretch of tunnel, between dodging support beams and the occasional skittering rat that made her yelp and Min Jae, unbelievably, smirk, the pieces started sliding together. "Baekdu," she said suddenly. "The name from the hotel. You reacted to it." Min Jae's flashlight beam wavered, just slightly. "Baekdu Mountain is where my father is buried. It's also a code name, one used exclusively by people who've earned the right to sit at my table. So whoever's selling you out isn't some low-level nobody." "No," he said quietly. "It's someone who's been sitting at that table since before you were old enough to translate a sentence." They emerged, eventually, onto a rain-slicked rooftop overlooking a Seoul that looked, from this height, disarmingly peaceful. A city of small golden windows, utterly unaware of the war quietly reorganizing itself somewhere beneath its subway lines. Amara sat with her back against a water tank, catching her breath, watching Min Jae pace the roof's edge like a man doing complicated arithmetic in his head. "Here's what I don't understand," she said. "Your men said mercy kills kings. Your own friends said it to your face. But the men who hit that safe house, they weren't testing your mercy. They were testing your information. Somebody wanted me specifically, not dead in general, dead before I could say something." Min Jae stopped pacing. "Say it," he said. "What if this was never about protecting your empire from a witness?" Amara said slowly, the shape of it finally coming into focus. "What if it's about protecting someone inside your empire from what I overheard? Someone who needed the leak story to stay a mystery. Because the moment it stops being a mystery, everyone starts asking who benefits." Min Jae said nothing for a long moment. Rain had started again, soft and cold, running down his collar in a way he didn't seem to notice. "Every war I've ever fought," he said finally, "I could see coming. I could smell it a year out, like weather. This one, I didn't smell at all. Which means whoever's behind it has spent years making sure I wouldn't." If you were in Amara's position, trapped between a man everyone calls a monster and an unseen traitor who's clearly worse, would you trust him? Or run the second you got the chance? Drop your answer below. Only the traders watching this story will scroll past without saying which side they'd choose. 2 hours, Min Jae said finally, checking a watch that had somehow survived a gunfight and a laundry chute unscathed. "That's how long we have before my absence becomes a headline instead of a rumor. I need names. I need to know exactly who had access to that safe house." "And if the answer is someone you trust?" Min Jae looked out over the rooftops, jaw tight, rain darkening his shoulders. "Then I find out exactly how much trust is worth in this city," he said. "Historically, the answer is less than people think." They reached the second safe house, smaller, unlisted. Even in Minjae's own records, a favor owed by a restaurant owner who'd once needed a debt quietly forgiven, just as the sky began its slow bruise from black to gray. Amara collapsed onto a stool in the cramped kitchen, and for the first time all night, nobody was shooting at her. It felt, absurdly, like the strangest luxury she'd ever experienced. Min Jae made 2 phone calls. The first was short, coded, unreadable to her. The second, he made with his back to her, voice dropping into something low and careful. The tone, she realized, of a man testing a person he desperately hoped he wouldn't have to stop trusting. "Who was that?" she asked, when he finally sat down across from her, exhaustion carving new lines into a face that had, 6 hours ago, looked untouchable. "The only three people who knew about Yoito," he said. "Myself, my accountant, who has been too terrified of me to breathe wrong in 15 years. And," he stopped. "And your friend," Amara finished quietly. "The one who called mercy a disease." Min-jae didn't answer, which was, by now, an answer she understood better than words. She'd watched him not answer his way through an entire night. Every silence a door he wasn't ready to open. Every pause a room he wasn't ready to walk into. "His name is Taesung," Min-jae said finally, like the syllables cost him something. "We grew up 3 streets apart. I gave him his first real job when everyone else in this city thought he was too soft for this life. He has buried 2 of my enemies with his own hands, and once sat beside my father's hospital bed for 6 straight days, so I wouldn't have to do it alone." "That's not proof of innocence," Amara said gently. "That's proof of history. Those aren't the same thing." "I know the difference," Min-jae said, sharper than he meant to. He caught himself, exhaled. "I know the difference. I've simply spent 20 years refusing to apply it to him." Amara studied him, the way his hands, steady through gunfire and glass, and a genuinely undignified laundry chute, now sat clenched on the table like he was holding something in by force. "What changed?" she asked. "Tonight, I mean. What actually changed your mind?" "The safe house," he said. "Only 3 people knew. I trust my accountant the way I trust arithmetic. Completely. And only because the numbers have never once given him a reason to lie. That leaves one name. And the timing." He rubbed his jaw, and for a moment looked less like a mafia boss and more like a man doing very unwelcome math. "Taesung is the one who told me mercy was a disease. He said it the moment I hesitated over you. As if he needed me to choose quickly. As if he needed you gone before you had time to say anything else." "Or," Amara offered carefully, "he was just being your friend, trying to protect you from a decision he thought was dangerous." "Don't," Min-jae said, quieter now. "Don't give me an easy answer just because the true one is ugly. You didn't survive tonight by lying to yourself. Don't start on my behalf." She didn't have a response for that, partly because he was right, and partly because something about the way he said it, low and raw, made her chest ache in a way that had absolutely nothing to do with fear anymore. His phone buzzed. He read the message once, then again, jaw tightening with each pass. "What is it?" Amara asked. "Taesung," he said, turning the screen toward her. "Heard about Yoito. Thank God you're both alive. Where are you?" "I'll bring Min. Secure the location myself." "That sounds like concern," Amara said carefully. "It does," Min-jae agreed. "Which is exactly the problem. Only 4 people know we're even alive right now. And I never told him." The silence that followed had weight to it. The specific gravity of a man realizing the last wall he'd never bothered to check for cracks had been hollow the entire time. "So what do we do?" Amara asked. Min-jae stood, jaw set, something cold and final settling into his expression. Not the careless menace she'd first met in that windowless office, but something sharper, more personal, forged in the specific fury reserved for betrayal wearing a familiar face. "We let him find us," he said. "And this time, I make sure I'm the one who's ready." Taesung arrived alone, or so he wanted them to believe. Min-jae had learned decades ago that men who insisted on coming alone rarely did, and he'd used the hour before dawn wisely, positioning 3 of his most loyal men on the rooftops flanking the restaurant. Men whose loyalty he'd verified the old-fashioned way, by checking exactly where they'd been standing when the safe house fell. "You're alive," Taesung said, stepping through the back door with his hands visibly empty, relief written across his face with what looked, to anyone who hadn't spent the last 6 hours reevaluating every expression the man had ever made, like genuine warmth. "I've had men searching every safe house we own since dawn broke. I thought." "You thought wrong," Min-jae said, "about several things." Something shifted behind Taesung's eyes, small, almost imperceptible, the flicker of a man recalculating faster than his face could keep up with. Amara, standing slightly behind Min-jae, felt it too. The way the temperature of the room seemed to drop a few careful degrees. Only 4 people knew Amara and I survived the attack, Min-jae continued, voice level, terrifyingly calm. You weren't one of them. And yet here you are, offering to secure a location you shouldn't know exists. Min-jae? Did you know, Min-jae said, cutting through whatever explanation was forming, that I once asked you, years ago, why you never wanted your own territory, your own name on the wall instead of mine. You told me loyalty was worth more than ambition. I believed you. I have believed you for 20 years, Taesung. 20 years is a very long con to run. The mask didn't so much fall as dissolve slowly, the way ice gives way not with a crack, but a long, resigned sigh. Taesung's shoulders dropped. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its warmth entirely, replaced by something flat and almost relieved, the exhaustion of a man tired of performing. You want to know why? Taesung said. Because I built half of what you call your empire with my own hands, and you never once thought to ask if I wanted my name on it too. I buried Min for you. I sat beside your father while he died so you could keep your hands clean of grief. And every year, I watched you sit a little higher while I stood a little longer in your shadow. The harbor route wasn't betrayal, Min-jae. It was rent. I was finally collecting what you owed me. And Amara? Min-jae's voice had gone dangerously quiet. What did she owe you? Nothing, Taesung said, almost gently, which was somehow the worst part. She was just unlucky enough to overhear the wrong conversation at the wrong charity gala. But you'd already started hesitating over her before I ever gave the order to have her killed. That's when I knew the wall was already cracking. I just decided to help it fall faster. Min-jae didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't need to. The men on the rooftops had already made their presence known, silhouettes shifting against the graying sky, and Taesung, for all his 20 years of careful ambition, had walked into the one room in Seoul where his old friend still held every advantage. You could have asked for a seat at the table, Min-jae said, and for the first time all night, something genuinely sad moved across his face. I would have given you one. You never would have, Taesung said. Kings don't share thrones. You taught me that too. What happened next, Amara would later tell herself, was not something she needed to describe in detail to anyone. Not because it was hidden from her, but because some images belonged to the people who lived them, not the people who'd only witnessed the aftermath. When it was over, the restaurant kitchen held a silence that felt different from every silence that had come before it that night. Not tense, not waiting. Finished. Min-jae stood by the window as the sun finally cleared Seoul's skyline. Gold lights sliding across rooftops that had, hours earlier, hidden gunfire and betrayal in equal measure. Amara came to stand beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, close enough that neither of them moved away. You saved my life tonight, she said. More than once. You saved mine, he said. You just don't know it yet. A man who never hesitates never really lives. He just survives over and over until something finally gets tired of missing. Is that a compliment? It's the truth, he said. And for the first time since she'd met him, his smile reached his eyes completely, unguarded, undefended. The face, she suspected, of the man he might have been if an empire hadn't gotten to him first. Outside, Seoul woke up exactly as it always did, glittering and oblivious, utterly unaware that somewhere in its rain-washed streets, a king had nearly lost his throne, found his humanity instead, and decided, for once, that the second one was worth infinitely more.